I was at my kitchen table Wednesday morning, starting the day like I always do. One hand wrapped around my first cup of coffee, the other scrolling through messages on my phone. The early light spilled in through the window, catching the unfinished crossword puzzle from yesterday. At 63, I had my little rituals. Coffee came first, then catching up on texts. News only if I felt emotionally armored enough. Daniel's text came in at 6:43 a.m., which caught me off guard. He's never been what you'd call a morning person. There was a video attached, and the preview image showed what looked like bundles of cash. For a second, I figured maybe he'd hit some kind of lucky break. He's been struggling ever since the divorce 2 years ago. Part-time gigs. The odd loan request. I tapped on the video. It opened with shaky footage, like he was filming one-handed. Stacks of 20s were spread out across a bed with that all-too-familiar floral motel comforter. Then came Daniel's voice, clear as day. Last batch went through smooth. Next one's set for Friday. He shifted the camera slightly, and some papers came into view. My stomach turned when I saw my name on what looked like bank documents. "She's perfect for this," Daniel's voice said, full of that smug confidence he had as a teenager. "No one suspects a sweet old lady." A pause. "She can't even keep her own checkbook balanced half the time." The camera moved again. I saw what looked like my signature. It was beside dollar amounts that made my hands tremble as I set down my coffee. Next drops Friday night. Same account. Same method. She won't even notice. The video stopped. I sat frozen, the kitchen clock ticking loud in the silence. Outside, a robin hopped across the deck. My hands were oddly steady, but inside, it felt like missing a stair in the dark. I watched the video again, then once more. By the third viewing, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to call him. I wasn't going to confront him in a burst of anger. If he thought I was still oblivious, maybe I could dig deep enough to see how far this went. I didn't spend 32 years teaching 8th grade math without learning how to collect evidence. I just never imagined I'd be investigating my own child. The first thing I did was head over to the little desk in the living room corner. I pulled out the shoebox, where I kept all my old bank statements. Harold used to manage all this before he passed, but the last 4 years had taught me to pay attention in ways I hadn't before. I carried 6 months' worth of statements to the dining table and spread them out like graded tests. The afternoon sun came through the west window, sharp and unforgiving. Every line, every number stood out in that light. There they were, those deposits I'd noticed but never questioned too closely. They were labeled with things like client refund or rebate processing, amounts varying from a few bucks to thousands. I had asked Daniel about them once. He'd mentioned something vague about helping people with online returns. It sounded harmless enough at the time. Now, I slid on my reading glasses and started looking with intention. Every single deposit was under $10,000. Every single one. You don't spend 3 decades watching middle schoolers try to cheat without learning how to spot a pattern, and this was definitely a pattern. But what hit harder were the withdrawals. Transfers I didn't recall authorizing, all electronic. All under that same suspicious $10,000 mark. The dates matched the deposits, money in, money out, within a day or two. It was like my account was a drive-through for someone else's business. I found Harold's old magnifying glass, the one he used for stamps, and looked closely at the signatures. They mimicked mine almost perfectly, but the R in my last name had a loop I'd never made, and the middle initial looked just a hair off. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Daniel. "Morning, Mom. Hope you're having a good day. Love you." I stared at those words for a long while. Then I flipped the phone face down and went back to the statements. One deposit stood out. $4,800 from Northside Distribution LLC, out of Cleveland. I'd never heard of it. I'd never been to Cleveland. I'd certainly never ordered anything that needed a refund from Ohio. But there it was, $4,800 in, and the next day, out again minus a $50 processing fee. I stood up and made myself a peanut butter sandwich. That's what I do when I need to think. I leaned on the kitchen counter, staring out at the neighbor's backyard garden, trying to remember what I did last Tuesday. Groceries. Lunch with Margaret. A perfectly boring Tuesday. Definitely not the kind of day I moved nearly $5,000 around. Back at the table, I noticed something new. Each deposit had a reference number. Sequential. Clean. Whoever was doing this was meticulous. The most recent was labeled 127, which meant this wasn't new. This had been going on for quite some time. I picked up my phone and went through Daniel's texts. They were all upbeat, all normal, all lies. Outside, the mail truck rolled by like clockwork, and the neighbor's dog barked at it like he did every day at 2 p.m. Some things, at least, were still predictable. I waited until Thursday afternoon to call him. Just long enough that it wouldn't seem tied to the video, but not so long he'd find it strange I hadn't reached out. Timing matters. It's something I'd learned after decades managing classroom behavior. Sometimes silence is more telling than any lecture. He picked up on the second ring. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" "Oh, sure," I said, sitting at the kitchen table with my checkbook open for effect. I wasn't balancing anything, but the illusion mattered. I got one of those alerts from the bank yesterday. Said there was a deposit. I paused. "Was that you doing something on my behalf?" There was the slightest hesitation, less than a second, almost imperceptible. "Which deposit?" "Tuesday, I think. A few $1,000s. Some company in Ohio." I kept my tone casual, like I was asking about a mystery package that showed up at the door. "Oh, that," he said, his voice warming. "Yeah, remember that return service I told you about?" It was from a canceled bulk order. He was settling into his story now. They refund through client accounts to bypass processing fees. It sounded complex enough to discourage further questions, which, I realized, was probably the goal. "Ha, handy," I said, chuckling lightly, though I don't recall ever buying anything that pricey. "You didn't," he said quickly. "It's just a pass-through. The money doesn't really touch your funds. It just travels through your account." He was speeding up now, like he used to when explaining why he came home past curfew. "I should have told you, but you know how you get with financial stuff." There it was, the familiar blend of patronizing affection meant to disarm me. "It used to work. Not today." "Well, keep them coming," I said with a small practice laugh. "At my age, every little bit helps. Love you, Mom. Talk soon." After the call ended, I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then I walked over to the window. The street looked the same as always. Kids on bikes, a neighbor clipping his hedges, the mailman halfway down the block. Nothing had changed except everything had. My son had just lied to me so easily, like he'd done it 100 times before. My phone buzzed again. Daniel this time with a follow-up. Don't mention that deposit to anyone. Okay, the business is sort of off the books. Don't want to complicate things with the IRS. I read the text twice, then set the phone down and made a cup of tea. When you've spent your life catching fibs from 13-year-olds, you learn the warning signs. And right now, every single one of mine was lighting up. Friday morning, I baked banana bread. It was Harold's favorite. Used to be Daniel's too, once upon a time. The smell drifted through the house, warm and familiar. Like everything was still normal. I wrapped the loaf in foil while it was still warm, then got in the car and drove across town to Daniel's place. He lived in one of those old Victorian houses that had been carved into apartments. The kind of place where charm came with peeling paint and beige walls. Daniel's unit was on the first floor, through a side door that used to be part of a porch. His car was in the driveway, a beat-up Honda, well kept but clearly past its prime. Whatever trouble he was in, he wasn't flaunting it. I knocked on the door with the banana bread in hand, trying to look like a mother who just dropped by. He opened the door in jeans and a damp t-shirt, hair still wet from a shower. "Mom," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Banana bread," I said, holding it up. "Made too much. Figured you could use some." He smiled, and for a moment, it looked real. "That's sweet. Come in." The apartment was small. Neat. A couch, a TV, a little table with 2 chairs, and a view into the kitchen through an arched opening. Everything seemed ordinary except for the high-end laptop open on the table and a phone that buzzed with incoming texts. "Want coffee?" he asked, already heading into the kitchen. "That'd be lovely." I could hear him clattering around mugs, filters, the drip of water. I wandered over to the shelf with the framed photos. Daniel and his ex-wife on their wedding day. Daniel and me at his graduation. Harold, cradling newborn Daniel like he was holding a miracle. The phone buzzed again. "Mom," he called from the kitchen. "Can you grab that for me? If it's important, just yell." I picked it up out of habit, but when I saw the screen, my hand froze. The caller ID was a single letter, M. I didn't answer. Just sat it back down and walked to the window like I hadn't seen a thing. My hands were trembling, so I clasped them behind my back. The phone rang again. This time, Daniel came out drying his hands on a dish towel. "Sorry," he said, scooping up the phone. "Gotta take this." He didn't even glance at the name. Yeah, I stayed by the window, pretending to watch a neighbor's cat tiptoe through the grass, but I heard every word. "Warehouse, North Side, Friday night." His voice was low, all business. "She's in for this round too. Same as last time." I saw my reflection in the window pail, stunned. I picked up one of the photo frames, pretending to study it. "Everything's clear. She's got no clue." A pause. "No, I'm sure." Same arrangement as always. The coffee maker beeped. He ended the call quickly. "Right. See you tonight." When he reappeared in the room, he was smiling again. That same boyish grin he'd used since he was 5 to dodge trouble. "Sorry, work stuff." He handed me the coffee. "How's it taste?" I took a sip just to have something to hold. "Perfect. Thanks." We chatted for another 15 minutes. Weather, books, the neighbor's new fence, all safe territory. But the whole time, that phone buzzed every few minutes, and I could see him itching to check it. When I finally left, I drove around the block twice before heading home. It felt silly, but then again, nothing felt quite real anymore. Back in my kitchen, I grabbed a notepad and wrote down everything I could remember. Warehouse ... North Side. Friday night. Same amount. Same setup. That name Northside Distribution LLC kept circling back. I stared at those words until they stopped making sense. Then I tore out the page and tucked it into my purse beside my grocery list and a gas station receipt. Some secrets feel heavier the longer you carry them. And this one was getting heavier by the hour. Saturday morning, I called Daniel and invited him to lunch. "I've been thinking," I told him, "about what you said. About your business. Maybe I could help." There was a pause, then that please tone I knew too well. "Sure, Mom. That sounds great. What about that place by the river?" The Riverside Cafe sat along the water with picnic tables and blue umbrellas. You could smell fried fish from the parking lot. Daniel was already seated when I arrived, tucked into a corner table with his back to the river. He stood to hug me, and I noticed something shiny under his shirt cuff. "You look nice," I said, settling into my seat. "That new?" I nodded at his wrist. He tugged the sleeve down quickly, but not before I saw a silver watch rimmed with what looked like diamonds. "Oh, this, a gift from a friend. Must be quite the friend." I opened the menu, though I already knew what I wanted. "Nice taste." Daniel shrugged and focused on the lunch specials like he hadn't heard me. Some people are generous. We ordered turkey club for me, fish and chips for him, and made small talk while we waited. Boats on the river, clouds rolling in, the kind of things people talk about when they're trying not to talk about other things. He kept checking his phone, but I pretended not to notice. When the food came, I leaned in. "So, this business of yours, the returns thing, it sounds complicated. But if there's a way I can help ... His face lit up. "It's really not that complicated. Just a lot of moving parts." He picked up a French fry, gestured with it like a pointer. "See, companies get stuck with products they can't sell. They dump it cheap to liquidators. People like me buy it up. And then you flip it, sometimes. Or I help the original companies process refunds so they don't take the loss." He grinned like he was proud of how clever it all sounded. "It's all above board. Just creative accounting." He was smooth ... to smooth. If I hadn't seen the video, hadn't gone over my bank records line by line, I might have bought every word. And that's where I come in, right? Sometimes the refunds are too big for my personal accounts. He popped a bite of fish into his mouth, so I use family accounts as a temporary buffer. That way, the transactions don't flag anything. "Flag, yeah," he said almost casually. "Banks have to report anything over 10 grand. But under that, doesn't trip the system." He said it like he was describing a coupon trick at the grocery store. "How much are we talking?" "Nothing crazy. A few thousand at a time." He reached across the table and patted my hand. "Really appreciate how chill you've been about all this, Mom. Not everyone would be so trusting." I looked at his hand resting on mine. No wedding ring anymore, but a gold pinky ring had taken its place. Something new, something flashy. Probably another gift from a friend. "I just want to help however I can," I said. "You've had a rough go since the divorce." "It's getting better," he said quickly. "This business, it's growing. Actually ... He leaned closer. "I'm looking at houses." "Houses? Just looking." "There's one on Highland Avenue I like. Highland, where the houses don't list under $500,000. Nothing set yet, he added, backpedaling a little. We changed the subject. Talked about weather, neighbors, whatever passed for safe. But I noticed the details, the way he paid with cash from a thick roll. The generous $20 tip on a $30 check. The designer sunglasses he slipped on as we stepped outside. All those little things that whispered of something rotten. After we said goodbye, I sat in my car for a moment, watching him pull away. Then I called Margaret. She picked up on the first ring, like always. Ruth, how was lunch with Daniel? Educational, I said. You busy this afternoon? Margaret lived in a tidy little ranch on the other side of town. Neatly trimmed hedges, mailbox painted fresh each spring. The kind of home that made everything seem orderly and safe. She used to manage First National Bank for nearly 3 decades before retiring. If anyone could make sense of what I was seeing, it was her. She met me at the door with a pot of coffee already brewing and a look on her face that reminded me of the day I called her after Harold died. You sounded shaken, she said, leading me to the kitchen table. What's going on? I pulled the stack of bank statements from my purse and laid them out across the table, just like I'd done at home. I need you to look at these, I said. Tell me what you see. Margaret put on her glasses and leaned over the pages. She didn't speak for a long time, just small humming noises, the kind she made when she was deep in thought. Finally, she looked up. Ruth, where did you get these? They're mine. That's my account. Her eyes narrowed. These are your transactions. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I told her everything. The video, Daniel's explanation, the phone call I'd overheard in his apartment. She didn't interrupt. Her expression just got more serious as I went on. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and rubbed her forehead. Oh, honey, she said quietly, this is bad. How bad? This is textbook money laundering. She pointed at the deposits. All under 10 grand, to avoid mandatory reporting. She tapped the dates. Money goes in, money goes out. Always within 24 to 48 hours. Your account is being used like a pipeline. My coffee had gone cold, but I hadn't noticed. What does that mean for me? Margaret's voice was calm but firm. Legally, you could be implicated. Banks are required to flag suspicious activity, and this, Ruth, is suspicious. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't authorize those transfers. I didn't sign anything. Can you prove that? She looked at me gently. Because someone who has access to your account clearly did. And unless you reported them, when they happened, double quotes, I didn't. I admitted. I saw the deposits and assumed Daniel was just helping out. I thought the withdrawals were bills I'd forgotten. She nodded slowly. Then you need to act. Fast. What do I do? You need to show you weren't part of this. She took a breath, thinking aloud now. You'll need bank records going back at least a year. Authorization documents. If your signature was forged or your account accessed electronically without your knowledge, there may be a digital trail. She hesitated. But you need to be careful. What do you mean? Think about it, Ruth. Her eyes locked with mine. If Daniel's involved with people who move this kind of money, and they find out you're asking questions, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The sun was shining through her kitchen window, casting bright squares across the table. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. It all felt so ordinary, so cruelly normal. You think he'd hurt me? I think desperate people do desperate things. She stacked the papers into a neat pile. If he figures out you could be at risk too. I drove home slowly, through tree-lined streets where kids played in driveways and neighbors waved from porches. A regular Saturday, except I had a folder full of evidence that my son might be a criminal. Back at my kitchen table, I made a list, bank records, proof I hadn't agreed to any of this, evidence that I was a victim, not an accomplice. And I'd have to do it all without letting Daniel suspect a thing. But the hardest part wasn't the planning, it was facing the truth Margaret had said out loud. The boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. He might be dangerous now. Sunday evening, I sat at the kitchen table again. Bank statements spread out. Legal pad beside me. Notes scribbled in my own shorthand. I was reviewing dates, amounts, patterns. Trying to think like a detective, not a mother. That's when I heard the car door slam in my driveway. Through the window, I saw Daniel walking up the path, his pace quick and purposeful, the kind of walk that meant he had an agenda. I swept the statements into a pile and slid them under the newspaper just as the doorbell rang. "Mom," his voice called through the door. "It's me." I opened the door with what I hoped was a neutral smile. "Well, this is a surprise." "Sorry for dropping by," he said, slightly out of breath. "Was in the neighborhood. Just need to run a quick deposit through your account." "That okay?" He was already stepping inside, headed straight for the kitchen where my laptop usually sat on the counter. Luckily, I had tucked it away. "Oh," I said, following him in. "Actually, I was about to head out. Margaret called. Said she needed a hand with something. This won't take long." He glanced around the kitchen, scanning surfaces. "Where's your laptop?" "I put it away," I said, reaching for my purse. "And really, I should get going." Margaret sounded a little shaken. Instead of taking the hint, Daniel sat down at the table. "What's going on with Margaret?" "I'm not sure. Just said she needed company." I stayed standing, hoping my posture would nudge him toward the door. "Can we do the deposit thing tomorrow instead? It's kind of time-sensitive." His eyes drifted to the corner of the newspaper, where a few lines of the bank statement had slipped out. "What's that?" My heart skipped. "What's what?" He leaned forward and lifted the edge of the paper. I moved fast, placing my hand over it. "Just bills," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Nothing worth reading, bills." His eyes met mine, steady and unreadable, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Mom," he said carefully, "those look like bank statements." "Well, yes," I said lightly. "I pay bills from my account." "Revolutionary, I know." He didn't laugh. He leaned back in his chair and really studied me, in a way that felt invasive. "You're not starting to ask questions, are you?" The air between us went still. Outside, I could hear a neighbor's dog barking and a TV murmuring through someone's window. The usual sounds of a quiet Sunday night. But in here, the silence felt sharp. "Questions about what?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just kept looking at me, like he was trying to read my thoughts. Then, just as suddenly, he relaxed. That same familiar smile returned, smooth as always. "Nothing. I just worrying about you, living here alone." "You tend to overthink." He stood and walked toward me. "You'd tell me if something was bothering you, right?" "Of course." He leaned in to kiss my cheek. It was the same gesture he'd used since he was a boy, but this time, his hand lingered on my shoulder a moment too long. I'll call you tomorrow about the deposit, he said. Have fun at Margaret's. After he left, I didn't move right away. I waited until I heard his car pull out, watched until his taillights disappeared down Maple Street. Then I pulled the statements back out and carried them to the bedroom. I locked them in the small safe Harold had installed in the closet years ago. Then I called Margaret. I used you as an excuse, I told her, in case he checks. You think he's suspicious. I know he is. I described the visit, the questions, the way his eyes landed on those papers. Margaret didn't speak for several seconds. When she did, her voice was quiet but serious. Ruth, you need to move faster than we talked about. I know. And maybe stay somewhere else for a few days. I looked around the bedroom, at the wedding photo on Harold's dresser, at the wallpaper I picked out 15 years ago. Leaving my home because I was afraid of my own son. It sounded impossible, until I remembered the way he looked at me. The weight of his hand on my shoulder, and the quiet calculation in his voice when he asked that question. Maybe impossible was exactly what this situation had become. Monday morning, I called Margaret before I could talk myself out of it. I want to go through with what we discussed, I said. Set up the proof. You're sure? Especially after last night. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold. The kind of cold that sneaks up when you've been sitting still too long. He's getting cautious. If I want to catch him, it has to be now. Margaret paused for a beat. All right. I'll contact someone at the bank. We can set up a monitored account. But Ruth. I know, I said before she could finish. There's no going back once we do this. We spent the next hour mapping out the details. Margaret would arrange an account that tracked every login. Every transaction, every digital signature. Then, I'd bait Daniel with money. Enough to make him sloppy. How much are you thinking? She asked. 15,000. That's a big number. He mentioned buying a house. I'll tell him I want to help clear his debts, get a fresh start. Margaret hesitated. That's a lot to put on the line. It's not really a risk. If he tries to launder it, we'll have proof. And if I'm wrong. I didn't finish that sentence. Because I wasn't wrong. I knew it the way you know when a student is cheating even before you catch them red-handed. By Wednesday, everything was ready. I called Daniel and used the voice I'd spent decades perfecting, the soft tone mothers use when they want to sound helpful, with just a little guilt sprinkled in. I've been thinking about what you said over lunch, I told him, about money being tight, wanting to buy a home. A pause. I'd like to help. Mom, you don't have to. I want to. Your father left me more than I need. And what's the point of having it if I can't use it to support my own son? I inhaled. 15,000. It should be enough to wipe things clean and give you a solid start. There was silence, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. He needed it, badly. That's incredibly generous, he said eventually, but I couldn't. You're not taking it, I interrupted. I'm giving it. How about we meet tomorrow at that cafe downtown? I'll bring everything. You're really sure about this? Absolutely. Thursday morning, I arrived early at Corner Coffee with an envelope in my purse. Inside were $15,000 in marked bills. Margaret's contact at the bank had been meticulous, recorded every serial number, photographed each one. I activated the recording on my phone and kept it face down on the table. Daniel walked in right on time. He looked different, not like himself. A little too polished, a little too jumpy. He sat down. eyes flicking to the door, to the window, to his phone. "You seem distracted," I said as I slid the envelope across the table. "Just work stuff." He picked it up without opening it. "Mom, I can't tell you how much this means to me. No pressure to pay it back right away. Take your time. Just promise me you'll use it well." "Of course." But his eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the cafe. He was already planning where that money would go. "This will really help smooth out some cash flow issues." I nodded, keeping my face blank. Margaret's contact had said we needed him to use the bills to physically move them through the laundering pipeline so they'd become admissible evidence. We were finishing our coffee when the door chimed. A man walked in, mid-40s, jeans, dark jacket. Just another customer unless you were watching Daniel. His entire body tensed. The man glanced our way, made brief eye contact with Daniel, gave a small nod, then turned to the counter, ordered, and left. Never said a word to us. Didn't have to. Daniel's hands were shaking slightly as he lifted his coffee. "Friend of yours?" I asked. "What? No, never seen him." He stood up quickly. "I really do need to run, Mom. Thanks again." He raised the envelope slightly. "I'll call you later about the deposit." After he left, I stayed put. 10 minutes passed. I thought about that man, the way he walked in like he knew exactly where to look. About the black sedan I'd seen in the lot with the engine running, windows tinted. When I walked to my car, I could feel eyes on me. I took the long way home, winding through unfamiliar side streets, checking my mirrors at every stop. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew two things. I was being watched, and whatever Daniel was caught up in, it wasn't just fraud anymore. It was something far worse. Friday morning, Margaret called before I'd even finished my first sip of coffee. Her voice was tight, no small talk. "They found the money." I set the cup down slowly. "Where?" "There was a raid last night. North Side warehouse." Just like in the call you overheard, my chest tightened. "They recovered cash, roughly $200,000, and some of your marked bills were mixed in with it. Inside a counting machine." "So that's it?" I asked quietly. "They have proof." She paused. "Proof that Daniel took your money and funneled it directly into a laundering operation tied to organized crime." I closed my eyes for a moment. The words sat like stones on my chest. "They're making arrests today," she added. My hands were cold. "What about me? You're protected," she assured me. "The account shows the funds came from your legal assets. And the documentation we've prepared proves you've been cooperating." Another pause. "But Ruth, they want to use you." "What do you mean?" "They want you to act normal if Daniel contacts you. Buy them a little time so they can arrest him safely." 2 hours later, I was still sitting at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. His message was short. "Things going bad. We need to talk now." I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I called Margaret. "He knows," I said. "What makes you think that? This isn't how Daniel asks for anything. This is panic." She was quiet for a beat. "Did he say where?" "No. Just said we need to talk." "Don't answer yet," she said. "Let me call my contact." 20 minutes later, she was back on the line. "They want you to suggest Miller's Park downtown. The pavilion area. It's public, easy to secure." "What if he's desperate now?" I asked. "What if he figures out it was me?" "You don't have to do this, Ruth," Margaret said gently. "But if you don't, he'll vanish." And he'll never have to answer for what he did. I thought of all those nights I'd stared at forged statements. All the lies he'd fed me like they were nothing. All the money funneled through my name. All the ways he'd used me without remorse. Tell them I'll do it, I said. I texted Daniel. Miller's Park. 1 hour. At the pavilion. His reply came instantly. Okay. I dressed carefully. Neutral sweater, comfortable shoes. Phone in my pocket recording everything. Tiny microphone tucked under my jacket, just as Margaret's contact had instructed. Miller's Park looked normal. Families on walks. Joggers. A group of kids throwing a frisbee. Daniel was already there, sitting on a bench under the pavilion. He looked terrible, worn out, pale, like he hadn't slept. When he saw me, he stood quickly. "Mom," he said, "thank God you came." For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be the one who crawled into my lap during thunderstorms. But then I remembered the warehouse. The marked bills. The months of deception. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting beside him. He sat close, too close. His voice dropped. "Everything's falling apart. The business, the people I work with. It's over." "What people?" "You don't get it," he said. "These aren't harmless guys. They're dangerous. And now they think someone tipped off the cops." A chill passed through me. Why would they think that? He turned to look at me, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "Because the money you gave me was marked." I kept my voice as steady as I could. "Marked. Serial numbers. Tagged by the feds. That's how they found the warehouse." I blinked, feigning confusion. "I pulled that money from my savings account." "Did you?" His voice was cold. "Or did someone help you?" "Someone who wanted to trace where it went." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He studied me hard. "The people I work with don't believe in coincidences, Mom." He leaned in. "And when bills like that show up, the same week as a major bust, they assume there's a leak." I swallowed hard. "Do they think it's you? They think it's someone with clean money. Someone who wouldn't draw suspicion." His hand rested on my arm, soft but firm. "Someone like a sweet, trusting old lady." All around us, the world kept moving, children laughing, birds calling, a dog barking in the distance. Normal sounds, in a moment that felt anything but normal. "I gave you that money," I said slowly, "because I love you, because I thought I was helping." "I know." His voice cracked. "That's the messed up part." There was bitterness there now. Something I hadn't heard from him before. "What are you going to do?" Before he could answer, I saw two men moving toward us. Plain clothes, but unmistakably coordinated. They were coming from opposite sides of the pavilion, like they'd practiced the walk. Daniel saw them, too. His grip on my arm tightened. Not painful, but firm, urgent. "When they question you," he said quickly, "you know nothing about my business. Got it? You gave me money, that's all." His eyes were pleading now. "You can say that, right?" The men were almost to us. One of them lifted what looked like a phone to his mouth, but his eyes never left our bench. "Daniel," I said. "Please," he whispered. "If they think you're involved, Daniel Morrison." The first man's voice was calm, authoritative. Daniel's hand dropped. He looked at me one last time, and in that moment, I think he realized the truth. I was the one who brought them to him. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm Daniel." The officer reached for his wrist, snapping on the handcuffs with practiced ease. "You have the right to remain silent." His partner moved between us, shielding me as they led Daniel away. He turned back, just once, Mom. I met his eyes, and I said the only thing I could. I told you I'd always help you, Daniel. I just never said how. They guided him toward an unmarked sedan parked by the curb. I sat there, watching the boy I had raised being led away in silence. No tears, no pleas. Just a look between us that said more than words ever could. And then he was gone. The car pulled away, disappeared into traffic like any other vehicle on any ordinary afternoon. Except it wasn't ordinary. Not for me. I remained on that bench a while longer, watching joggers pass, parents pushing strollers, teenagers giggling as they took selfies by the fountain. The world kept moving, like nothing monumental had just happened. Eventually, one of the officers came back over. He said I was free to go, that they'd be in touch. I nodded, stood slowly, and walked back to my car with the kind of careful, measured steps you take after something irreversible. At home, I closed the banking app on my phone, removed Daniel's access, deleted every shared login. Then I made a cup of tea and sat in the same kitchen where this entire unraveling had started. The clock ticked above the stove. Steam rose from my mug. Outside, the wind moved through the maple leaves. Some stories don't have tidy endings. Some don't offer forgiveness or closure. They just end. But sometimes if you're lucky, what's necessary and what's right are the same thing. This was one of those times. So that's it. That's what happened. Now I want to hear from you. Was I right to turn in my own son? Or should a mother protect her child no matter the cost? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you're still listening, remember, it's never too late to do the hardest thing, especially when it's the only thing left to do.